Welcome to the Good Growing Podcast. I am Chris Enroth, horticulture educator with the University of Illinois Extension, coming at you from Macomb, Illinois. And we have got a great show for you today. Drum roll, please. We are talking about what we did last year in terms of growing ginger, turmeric, and galangal. I think we've been hinting at this for a while now. Today, we are going to spill everything. We're going to throw it out all on the table. And it's going to be a lot of information about growing these three tropical spices here in Illinois. And what did we find out last year? We're going to dive into that. And I'm not going to do this by myself. I am joined, as always, by our co-host, horticulture educator Ken Johnson in Jacksonville. Hey, Ken.
Hello, Chris. It's nice to finally get this off our back.
I know. I've just been itching to talk about this. And so I'm so excited to share what we learned when it comes to ginger, turmeric, and galangal growing with folks. And so, I know you have a lot of pent up baggage here, Ken. So we're going to unload today.
I've also got bags of this stuff too that I still have around the office.
It's like, what are we going to do with all this stuff? So, hit us up if you want some. And we are also joined by our co-host, local foods educator Nick Frillman in the Bloomington Normal office. Hey, Nick.
Hey, Chris and Ken. It's good to be back and glad to talk about this topic today. I was sad to miss the presentation on these three crops at the Everything Local conference in Springfield. So looking forward to diving in with you two.
Well, this is going to be the backstage presentation. So this is going to be what you see behind the scenes here. So It's going to be a lot more information, the gritty details. So we have quite a bit to talk about this week, Nick. So if you wouldn't mind kicking us off with that first question on the topic for this week.
Yeah, not a problem. So, as Chris said, we're going to be flipping the tables, and I'm going to be the main interviewer, and we're going to let the listeners sit back, relax, and listen to what Chris and Ken have to tell us about growing ginger, turmeric, and galangal. So without further ado, let's set the stage a little bit and say, let's say I'm a tomato and cucumber high tunnel grower, vegetable farmer, etc. So I know a thing or two about growing high value horticultural crops. However, I've never heard of growing any of these crops in the Midwest before. I hadn't even heard about galangal until the last couple of weeks myself. So I'm a grower. I've never heard of these three crops. Let's start with, why in the world would I need to grow ginger, galangal, or turmeric if my cucumber and tomato rotation is working okay on my farm?
That is a very good question. And so I would say, first off, is examining how we have to grow these tropical spices, and that is in a high tunnel or some form of season extension. And so just picture in your mind a high tunnel typically is going to be metal pipes that are bent or that create the frame that over which a plastic is then skinned over top. And oftentimes the sizes of these can range anywhere from 15 foot wide to 25 foot long, all the way to 50 foot wide and 100 foot long. So they can be big or small structures, and they're considered fairly permanent types of structures, although they would be temporary. Most are not concreted in the ground, although I know some people do that with their high tunnels. So that creates an extension of the season in both the spring and the fall. And we need that when we're growing these tropical spices because they're such a long season crop. Now, where they would typically grow in India, they're out in the ground for 8 to 10 months of the year. And they can't do that here in Illinois because we have this thing called winter, and they would not survive that. So we need that season extension in order to do that. Now, what typically occupies that for a tomato or cucumber grower is going to be tomatoes and cucumbers, because that gives you the most bang for your buck to help you pay off the money that you invested in that structure. And so that's what you're typically going to see. But what initially got me started growing ginger and turmeric in the beginning was listening to Judson Reed, who's a Cornell specialist at the same conference you mentioned, Nick, but back in 2016, I think. And he talked about how we could utilize these other high value spices and rotate them in to help break up some of the plant diseases that can occur with our solanaceous and cucurbit crops. And so he was talking about introducing a new a family of plants in there to help break up disease cycles. So that's kind of where it all started.
Man, that's fascinating. And yeah, that definitely was what I was waiting for. I was thinking maybe there would be an issue with growing the same crop year after year in the same place, especially if you're talking about a fixed structure, like a concreted in the ground high tunnel or immobile high tunnel. But then, yeah, again, I guess the next question I have kind of on that same vein is, you mentioned getting the best bang for your buck from cucumbers and tomatoes from high tunnels. What are the incentives, monetary or otherwise, to grow these crops? So I guess let's start with monetary with Chris, and then Ken, I know that this was your first year growing just this past year, so maybe some, I don't know, non-monetary incentives to grow these crops. Like, was it fun or interesting to see something new in a high tunnel? But yeah, let's start with you, Chris.
So when Judson Reed was talking growing ginger in New York, he said this was selling for $20 a pound. And I thought, holy cow, what's a tomato go for? Well, this is again, 6 years ago. So, tomato back then, I don't know how many tomatoes you get for a pound, but, I would say probably $1.50 a pound of tomatoes. So, but you can grow a lot of tomatoes per square foot. Now per square foot, and that's kind of that value growers look at. How much money am I getting per square foot? I believe Judson said, tomatoes are still king in that. Mm-hmm. But in their research, it was tomatoes, ginger, cucumbers, and then kind of like intensive rotation of leafy crops. That was kind of the value per square foot that they were finding. And I can't remember off the top of my head what that was. I think it was like $7.50 a square foot for ginger, which is a lot. And I think it might have been like $9 or $10 for tomatoes per square foot. So it's a lot in terms of that. So it's a competitive crop monetarily speaking. Now in the past, we have been partnering with other commercial farm partners here in Illinois with grants in the past, just to try to figure this crop out, just to try to learn a little bit of its, kind of like what's good about it, pros, cons. Our commercial growers were selling ginger in rural Illinois for $24 a pound.
Wow.
Blew our minds. We did not expect that. And it's hard to buy by the pound. So you sell by the ounce, $1.50 an ounce. You can add that up, you get $24 a pound, and they would sell out. Once people knew they had it, they would sell it every time. And then they get messages on Facebook or, email or whatever saying, hey, when are you going to have more of this stuff? And so It became a valuable crop for them.
That's fascinating. And then Ken, I know again that you have a little bit less experience growing ginger, but you were one of the intrepid who attempted it last year. And I have not done so yet. This will actually be my first year growing it, I hope. We'll talk about that later. But from the perspective of a newer grower, could you tell our listeners a little bit about maybe some of the non-monetary incentives to grow these crops? Like, was it fun to see something new in the high tunnel, or interesting? Did it provide a story maybe for you and your coworkers?
Yeah. So I always like growing new stuff. So that was definitely a benefit to it. We were out there working. We'd have people stop by and ask, what's this? Why are you doing this? And things like that. And it's a pretty, we'll get into this more later, but it's pretty low maintenance. We didn't really have to do a whole lot of work with it. Maybe that's because it's the first year we've grown it in that location and we haven't had, some issues build up, but, water it and weed. And that was about all we had to do with it. So there wasn't a lot of labor that we were putting into it either.
That is a valuable consideration. And yeah, back to Chris's kind of quote to us about the dollar value per square foot of these crops when you're harvesting. maybe tomato is king still in terms of value per square foot. And Chris, I don't know if that number was taking into account things like input costs and labor, but maybe if it doesn't, maybe the less labor side of things that Ken just referenced could equal out the difference per pound.
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head. It's been a number of years since I've looked over Judson Reed's publications that he did. I know there were some points where he mentioned labor. I don't know if he figured that into the cost though per square foot.
Okay, well, definitely, yeah, farmers and backyard growers' time and energy in terms of labor is super valuable, as I'm sure everybody knows. But yeah, those are some really interesting incentives to consider. And so, yeah, that's some good information to know. And I guess we'll proceed on with the next question here. And so that would be, yeah, I think you alluded to it earlier. What plant family or families do these three crops belong to? Are they the same family? Are they different? And so, yeah, maybe getting a little more into what are the implications of that for avoiding plant disease in the high tunnel crop rotation, and why is that so important?
So that's a good question. And after we implemented the idea, that originally was spurred in the brains of us by Judson Reed, the idea of introducing a new plant family, and that is going to be the Zinziberaceae, and that includes ginger, turmeric, and galangal. So all three of these different spices are within that family, but they are separate species within that family. And what we pull out of the ground is going to be a rhizome, so a modified underground stem, which is kind of hard to get. It took me a few years to wrap my head around what that really means. And we'll talk about that here later on when it comes to fertility, but it's a stem. It's not a root. And it's underground. And so we'll talk about that though here when we get to fertility, because that makes a difference. But I think one important thing to note when it comes to introducing this new plant family and breaking up diseases is learning about a very important disease when it comes to growing ginger specifically, and that is going to be a soil-borne bacterial wilt. It's known as ginger wilt, and we can pop the scientific name below here, but I believe it's a type of, it is the same bacterial wilt, unfortunately, that afflicts tomatoes.
Oh no.
We didn't realize that at the outset. I needed to do probably a better literature review. But after looking at Hawaiian extension, we saw that this particular disease, Ralstonia solanacarium, is that about right?
Yeah, Ralstonia solanacearum, race 4 for ginger. Was a race 1 for tomatoes. So the strain that attacks ginger will weakly attack tomato, pepper, and eggplant. Laboratory tests have shown that the strain that causes severe tomato wilt does not attack ginger. There's possibility under field conditions the tomato strain could be severe on ginger.
Well,
that seems like it's not the end of the world. So I mean, I guess that's really good to know for growers big and small. Is that again, ginger is vulnerable to Ralstonia, right? Solanarium. I hope I said that right. So it weakly affects tomatoes afterwards. So it's again just a general liability to like the nightshade family after ginger. So maybe that's all okay as long as maybe the cucumber rotation comes in after tomatoes, right? So you would go ginger, cucumber, tomato, well, and then maybe you want to do cucumber on the front and back end of ginger and or this family of tropical spices and tomatoes, so that they're separated at least 1 year by cucurbits. Interesting. A nice puzzle.
That would be a good way to go about that. Yeah. And that just what Hawaiian extension, what they had found is that they researched, could they infect the ginger bacterial wilt, which is it's the same, again, it's so the disease that affects ginger, tomatoes, also peppers, that affects them, it's the same species, but they're different races. And what they found in the lab is that race 4, which affects ginger, that they could not get the tomatoes infected with that race,
Mm.
but they didn't look at field conditions.
Oh,
And so growing in a laboratory or a greenhouse or very
Yeah.
controlled settings is much different than growing out in the field with a lot of different stresses, whether it's environmental, insect, pest, weather, all that stuff. And so they cannot say, hey, race 4 that affects ginger is not going to affect tomatoes. They just, the research is not there to determine that. And this is a pretty bad disease for ginger. So Hawaii used to be our main supplier of ginger for the continental US. And because this bacterial wilt is soil borne and it persists in the soil, they lost that. And so really, for the most part, growers in Hawaii, they have to grow hydroponically. They can't even use soil there.
Whoa.
And really, for most what type of spices, ginger primarily, that they ship over to mainland US, it's hydroponically grown, or it's just for seed pieces to produce or grow ginger here in mainland US. Actually, most of
Wow.
our ginger comes from India.
Wow, that is fascinating. And so for any potential PhD candidates out there that want to do some research, I don't know. This sounds like a really interesting field trial that could be set up relatively easily in the Midwest
Yep.
at relatively low cost. So if I'm
And-
understanding correctly, I'll just summarize that the race of Rostonia solanarium that dramatically infects ginger, that plant disease is the same plant disease that could impact tomatoes, but they're different races of that disease. So it's been shown in a laboratory setting that they cannot infect one another, but that has not been tested under field conditions.
That's
I think
correct.
I think they showed that the ginger race could infect tomatoes to some extent, not as bad as the tomato race, but the tomato race in the lab has not been shown to affect ginger,
Yeah.
but not in the field.
And this is research in Hawaii. In Hawaii, they're trying to protect ginger because that's their main crop. Whereas here, our bread and butter is going to be tomatoes.
Mm-hmm.
And I did ask our plant pathologist, Diane Ploa, at the U of I plant clinic, and she said, we have not yet seen a Ralstonia solacarium race 4 in mainland US. And Hawaii has also developed a PCR test, which is something you could do right in the field. You could pull up the ginger if you think it's a suspect, take a sliver off of that and use that, throw it in a bag, smash it up, and put like a little litmus strip in there, and it will tell you if you have that disease. So
Wow.
So Hawaii has developed that, and they actually trained their ginger growers how to do that.
Well, that's all very reassuring. So don't panic, folks. It's
Yes.
still possible to grow these tropical, really cool sounding spices, and then maybe some cucumbers as a buffer, and then maybe tomatoes. So anyway, but it sounds like we're on the cutting edge of this research. There's more work to be done, as there always is with horticultural crops in laboratory and field conditions, especially in high tunnels. So yeah, I guess we'll leave that for later discussion, and maybe we can update our listeners if we ever hear a development on those that side of things. Hopefully we won't, which will be good news. But so moving on to our next question here, we covered the incentives of growing these 3 crops. We've talked about plant families, and they're all supposedly in the same plant family. So compared to the average money made per plant on tomato and cucumber, we've heard that ginger compares pretty well between cucumber and tomato in our Illinois high tunnels. But what about those others, turmeric and galangal? Are those pretty comparable?
So just when we look at ginger, we can say it's comparable because ginger has been a globally traded spice probably for thousands of years. It's in cuisine from Asia, Australia, Pacific Islands, but then globally, Africa, Europe, and then, as humans moved across the globe, ginger moved with it. And so in terms of cuisine, ginger's kind of in all, like, you look at European cuisine, ginger ale gingerbread. We think of those as like
Mhm.
classic type of European type or maybe English food. And so we all use ginger no matter where we're kind of at in the globe. It's more used as an ingredient, so we're just more familiar with it.
Mhm.
These other two, so I bet most folks listening or watching, they've heard of turmeric. Maybe you have some powdered turmeric in the spice cupboard that you rarely reach for. I reach for it quite a bit. We do a lot of different types of stir fries and fried rices, and I always just throw powdered turmeric in there. But then there's this other one, this third one, galangal, which was new to me this last year. Ken, had you heard of galangal before I had called you up and said, "Hey, Ken, you want to grow this other one too?"
I had not. That was a first for me too.
Yeah. So galangal is totally new to a lot of people. And so how does this compare? How does turmeric and galangal compare? Not very well. But there are growers who are interested. And so there's a few growers that actually met at this conference. So they don't grow acres of this stuff. They'll grow a row of this stuff and they mix it into kind of custom spice mixes that they create and they sell at farmers markets or grocery stores. But I think so. If folks are familiar with ginger, let's talk a little bit. Should we talk about right now, like what are these other two things?
Yeah.
Okay. So turmeric is used a lot. We actually eat a lot of turmeric. We just don't know it. Turmeric, there's different types, but for the most part, there is a bright orange type, there's a bright red, and there's a bright yellow type. And a lot of these are used, and the flavoring's kind of earthy, kind of subdued, I would say. And a lot of it, because of the coloring, is used as food coloring. They put it in American cheese to give it that color. They put it in mustard to give it that yellow color, an American mustard. It's used a lot. We eat it a lot. We just don't know we're eating it. And so it is being used in a powdered form mostly. And that's the only way I really know how to use turmeric in a powdered form. Ken, did you use turmeric at all from the stuff we pulled out of the ground this year, the fresh root or rhizome, I should say?
Yeah, I've grated it, thrown it into stir fry and stuff, and it stains your hands for a day or two if you're not careful. So you'll end up with yellow or orange hands. And I don't think I probably didn't put enough in. You can really taste it a whole lot. We have got so much of this stuff. We just kind of throw it in there just to see what happens.
Well, I can definitely vouch for the use of turmeric in cuisine. Actually, last week I was out sick, and a friend of mine sent me a chicken noodle soup recipe, or sorry, not chicken noodle, a chicken soup recipe. But this one was a Indian twist. So it had ginger, it had turmeric, it had actually ginger root and ginger powdered turmeric, and it didn't call for turmeric root, but I happened to have some in the fridge for something else that I made a while ago. My wife and I make something that's called fire cider. So it's basically an infused apple cider vinegar with all sorts of stuff designed to just get the body moving, get the circulatory system going when you're sick. Anecdotally. And we chop up peppers and garlic and onion along with ginger and turmeric, both infused in that apple cider vinegar for 4 to 6 weeks. And so that soup turned out really well, and it wouldn't have felt as nice, in the stomach when you're sick if it weren't for those two crops in tandem. So yeah, it was a really nice addition.
Yeah, so turmeric, it is part of the cuisine. Most Americans are not as familiar with how to use it, but I think a lot of us have it, at least the powdered form, in our spice rack. So now galangal, as we all said, this was new to us. And I had to do a lot of reading to kind of figure out what this was. And I found something out that when it comes to galangal, this is also, it's a root or rhizome, keep saying root, it's a rhizome, but it's underground, and you pull it out of the ground. And it's super strong, like you need a very sharp knife to cut this. But when you cut it open or you break it open, it smells like an evergreen. It has this like piney scent to it, this like resiny pine scent to it. And when it comes to traditional Thai curry, this is a required ingredient. I often think like ginger must be a required curry ingredient. And they said, no, ginger is actually just kind of a flavor enhancer. This galangal, this is a required ingredient in a traditional Thai curry. So but it is a very interesting spice. We have not yet cooked with it. One of our farm partners up in Galesburg, they actually, a chef bought it from them. And the chef was just amazed at the flavor, at the quality ingredient that it was. And she was very impressed with just being able to make a lot of different Asian dishes with galangal, because you can't really find that here in many states unless you go to like a specialty grocery store.
Yeah, so we used it for one recipe when I just get on the internet and search recipes for XYZ. And
Mhm.
one that popped up for galangal that did not have like 15 steps and 30 different ingredients was, I think it was just a stir fry. You just chopped it in like matchsticks and threw it in there.
Mhm.
So it was, you got kind of got that piney taste in it. So that, I mean, depending on if you like that or not, you may or may not enjoy that. But it was all right.
Yeah.
I'd eat it again.
And I could definitely see these three crops, but yeah, maybe even galangal. So we've talked about how ginger is very popular in rural Illinois. That's not maybe the case with turmeric, and maybe especially not with galangal. But I could definitely see how, if there were any growers listening who might want to experiment in the Chicago market, where typically lots of our immigrant populations in Illinois live, there's whole neighborhoods that are devoted to specific groups of people, and the farmers markets there are just absolutely astounding in terms of what you can find on offering. And it's really comforting for people to be able to buy ingredients that they remember from home. And so it would be really cool for farmers to, try and meet that demand.
Yeah, I think a lot of it just comes down to, do you have the market for it?
Mm-hmm.
Ginger, we know that because people use it a lot. But yeah, like mentioned, that the turmeric and galangal are not as widely known and
Mm-hmm.
widely used. So if you've got that niche market, you can probably, I would assume you could probably make some halfway decent money off of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do your market research.
And I'll say, because most of the stuff that we grow, at least as a university, we can't sell that. We can, but there's more paperwork involved. But so we can't sell that. So we give it away. And so we've given away our ginger to a local brewery in Macomb called Forgatonia. And they've actually made a couple brews with our ginger. Now I remember their head brewer, Sean West, I gave him 30 pounds the first year. And I think he threw like 10 pounds in a brew, just a test brew. And he said it came off so spicy. You mentioned the fire water, so this made me think of this. It was so spicy. He's like, I could never sell this. He's like, it gets the sinuses cleared, but I wouldn't be able to sell this. It's way too hot, he called it. So he's like, he threw in, I think maybe a pound into like the big, kettle, that he kegs up batches. And so he made a tripel with one. He made a traditional German beer, which I can't think of the name right now. So he's made a couple brews with that, and now he's experimenting with turmeric and galangal this year. He wants to see if he can get that piney flavor to carry through, because a lot of brewers add hops to their brews for that pininess. So he wants to see if he can get that to carry through to the end for a good taste.
Whoa, I wonder if it could be like a low cost replacement for hops.
Maybe.
Huh.
Yeah. You don't want to spend so much money on Citra.
Yeah. Well,
all those other copyrighted hops.
Well, and so much of those are spoken for even while they're still on the vine, not the vine, but the vine, as hops are on vines, which I just found out last year.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, so many of them are grown on contract that as a starting out brewer in a local town near us, it might be easier to have a grower grow you some galangal. But yeah, keep us posted, Chris, on what the head brewer tells you about that concoction.
Send you the invite when they tap the keg.
Here we go. Well, and so wow, yeah, learned something new today, that's for sure. But all right, so we've talked about dollar value returns, familiarity with these crops. Let's, for the sake of argument, just say I'm a grower from like the beginning of the podcast, and you've got me on board. I'm interested. I want to try out these crops hypothetically. You may have alluded to this a bit already, but where on earth do I get my seeds? And how do I know a reputable company when I see it to buy seeds from?
So when it comes to seed, we're not going to use our traditional seed like we'd buy tomato, cucumber, what have you seeds. We're actually going to be using the rhizomes. It's going to be similar to like potato seed pieces where you're getting the tuber that you're putting in the ground. So with these, all three of them, the ginger, turmeric, galangal, we're using those rhizomes that we're going to be sprouting as the seed pieces, so to speak.
And the question I always get is, can I just go to the grocery store, grab the ginger that I see on the shelf there and just sprout it? And I often will, I recommend to not do that. Can you do it? You probably can in a pinch, but we mentioned that bacterial wilt disease earlier. The stuff on the grocery store shelf, there's no guarantee that it doesn't carry or have that disease in it. And so you don't want to plant that in your soil and then never be able to grow ginger again for, after that, because you've introduced bacterial wilt into your garden or into your beds. So ideally you want to source from a reputable dealer who will certify that it is disease-free, which means it's going to cost more. But that certification for disease-free is a peace of mind that you're not going to be inoculating your soil with the disease that will prevent you from growing this crop in the future. So I think that is an important component of this, where you source from. Some things that I have noted when I've ordered from different companies, and we've ordered from companies from like the Caribbean to like southeastern US, like far southeastern US, Hawaii, and then even some down in the southern US. Some of these places do not consider the fact that we have winter right now. And right now, so it's the end of January, really want to start ordering these at the beginning of January. So the first start of the year is when a lot of these companies start taking orders, and usually by time February rolls around, you're going to start seeing sold out stickers on these online retailers. And so, but again, I have noted that some of these dealers, they don't take into consideration that they're going to be shipping into winter weather, and they ship anyway. I've ordered seed pieces to receive them a week later. Great in terms of that time, the shipping time. But it went through like 20-degree weather, and I got the rhizomes and they were mush. So these things can't freeze. You don't want them to freeze. It's going to kill them. They won't grow. The reputable dealer will hopefully have something on their website that says, will not ship until this date, or you tell us when you want us to ship this, because they don't want you to get their product. Damn it. They want to make sure you get it and it'll work for you. Mm-hmm. But again, some dealers don't think about this because they're not shipping this often to a cold climate area. Usually they're shipping to, warm year-round area. So it's an important consideration. I would say when hunting for this, we can't necessarily promote one company over the other, but look for disease certification that you can either specify or they will tell you when they ship it. And if you want to know where to find these things, just go to Mr. Google Pants and type in ginger seed pieces, and it will come up with a list of things. And we do have some presentations that we can share also that also list just sources. We don't recommend one over the other.
And I'm assuming the same thing is true with turmeric and galangal as well. So, you don't want them to freeze. Reputable dealers won't ship them to you until maybe after your frost date, or they'll ask you for when your last frost date is, et cetera. So kind of all the same as for ginger.
Yep. So just keep those criteria in mind. And if you're not sure, give them a call. Just call them and just say, hey, I just want to make sure I can grow this crop this year. I don't want to get mush.
And
all right.
And I'll add in, going through seed catalogs the last few weeks, I've noticed several different companies are now selling particularly ginger, but also turmeric. I've seen selling plants, that's going to be a lot more expensive. If you're doing this backyard and you only want to grow a plant or two, that's probably the way to go. Commercial scale, you probably want to get the seed pieces, but you can buy plants from, I think I saw them in 2 or 3 different catalogs that I haven't seen in the past. Maybe they were there and I just didn't pay attention because I didn't grow them before. But I am seeing them more and more.
Yeah, that's how I got started. It was just my gateway drug into growing tropical spices. I ordered live plants and I was hooked after that. And you can build up your seed stock from some of that too, and you can select for that. Key thing is when you're trying to select for future use is if there's anything that looks suspect in terms of disease, you get rid of it. You don't save that for planting next year. In a perfect world, if you're going to grow your own seed stock, that stuff never goes in the ground, at least until you plant that crop in the ground. So if you're growing seed stock, if you have access to hydroponics, do it like that, or do it in a container just off the ground. Don't let it touch the soil. Again, we don't think that bacterial wilt's in the soil, but this just eliminates that risk. So your container growing for the first year or first year or two, you can, select some good seed pieces to probably plant like a 25 to 30 foot row of ginger or turmeric or galangal. And so that's also one way to build that stock versus going to the grocery store and buying stuff that may not sprout or could be diseased.
Awesome. Good feedback. So I know a little bit now where to source my rhizomes from. I know a little bit about the options. So I guess there are live plants I can buy. So yeah, we've kind of begun to touch on the next question I had for you guys, which is telling me a little bit about the germination process of the rhizomes. So yeah, let's say I want to plant a 30-foot row. I don't want to spend all the money on live plants. So now I've got to get rhizomes and I've got to germinate them. I've heard through the grapevine that it's potentially could be difficult to germinate, or that maybe it's not difficult to germinate, but that takes a long time. I'm unaware that conditions required to germinate. This makes me a little anxious as a potential grower to try and, put my money into expensive seed and it might go south. To that, I would say personally, you never want to experiment with a ton of cash. I always say, like, in terms of a percentage of your total production area, you never want to exceed, 5 to 10%. If it's a working farm, that depends on, return on investment for your bottom line, paying employees. So just start out with a little. But yeah, could you two speak a little bit to the germination process and steps required?
So I will start and just let folks know about the study that we did this last year. We had test plot sites in Murfreesboro, Jacksonville, Quincy, Macomb. We had 2 different farms, well, actually really 3, but 2 different farms in Galesburg. And that meant, and we had our 2 treatments where one was high tunnel and one was caterpillar tunnel. So that meant we had a lot of ginger, turmeric, and galangal to grow. I think we had about 70 some flats that we had to sprout. And so we needed a big space. And so we used a greenhouse. So WU had a greenhouse and we used probably a length of benches. So 50 feet, probably another 25 feet. So about 75 feet worth of bench space was used to pre-sprout these crops. And I will just say the thing that we learned with that is we had student workers help us with watering, and we would probably change the soil mixture when it comes to pre-sprouting these because they're a little heavy-handed with the water. So even if there's if it's sopping wet or there's algae growing on the top of the soil, they still watered it. And so we would probably have grown in a mix that probably has more perlite in it, or maybe more of a cactus mix or something that's very well drained. Now, with that said, the pre-sprouting process, it's we have to get a leg up on the season. As we mentioned early on in the podcast, out in the tropics in India, these are in the ground for up to 10 months. So we have to get them going indoors, ahead of time. We call that pre-sprouting. And we are going to kind of that minimum seed piece size. There's not really a maximum, but that minimum seed piece size, we want it to be about 2 ounces. And we want to have at least 2 growing points. And you're going to see those growing points. They're going to be little swollen knobs on that ginger, turmeric, and galangal. There'll be swollen points. And that's where the leaf bud, that's where it is. And that's where the leaf comes up. And ideally, you're going to line them up in flats, and you're going to cover that with potting soil. And when you put the pieces in the flats, it's like putting a puzzle together. You try to fit as many as you can. I can fit about 20 to 25 per flat for ginger, probably more for turmeric, and then less for galangal, because galangal is a bit larger. And then cover that with potting mix. And then you can stack them on top of each other, because it's going to take, for ginger, it can take 4 to, I would say, 8 weeks for sprouting. Galangal, about 4 to 6 weeks for sprouting. And turmeric, which takes forever. It's actually almost took us 3 months last year to pre-sprout turmeric. We actually planted, remember this, Ken? We planted just turmeric, and it hasn't sprouted yet in the ground at all the test sites.
Yep. And then it all just kind of popped up all at once.
It did. At all across the state, it all just sort of popped up in the very same week, which was kind of astounding. It was pretty neat to get those reports of like, hey, our turmeric popped up, and then heard from Quincy, hey, the turmeric came up, and then Murfreesboro came up, and then the pieces that were sitting in my basement that didn't get planted, they sprouted in the box. And so I'm like, weird.
So
Strange.
you germinated turmeric for 3 months and it didn't grow, and then you put it in the ground and it grew?
It was very sleepy. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and it could have something to do with the weather too. I don't know.
I don't know. The weird thing was, no matter the weather conditions or wherever it was, it all seemed to sprout at the same time. So it's like there's some internal clock there that said, time to go.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that is fascinating. Yeah, plants are cool. For TLDR.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I would say if you're starting this out, do a flat or 2 flats worth of whatever spice you want to try. You want some bottom heat whenever you're doing this now. And we had the greenhouse, it was pretty warm in there, even in the late winter, early spring. But bottom heat does help. You want to maintain that temperature of that soil around 80 degrees. And then that will help with pre-sprouting. Good, well-drained soil mix or potting mix would be ideal. And be careful, don't overwater it, because I think we had some rot issues occur because we had some students that would overwater these flats when we were pre-sprouting.
Saying you can still do this inside if you don't have a greenhouse available.
I do it in my basement. Yeah.
Now, if you're doing that indoors, do you need a grow light, or is it basically just a factor of soil moisture and heat, and you could do it in pretty much no light?
I say, so the big growers, they will have their walk-in cooler, and they'll shift their walk-in cooler to a walk-in germination chamber, and they'll make it warm and humid in there. Yep. And they will just stack flats on top of each other. There's no light. You just have to make sure that you go in there and you check when they start sprouting. And so you could do the same. I always say, though, so for us gardeners or backyard or smaller growers, I always say, yeah, you might not get a sprouting until in 4 weeks, but you always want to have those lights ready, because there's nothing worse than a plant that, whether it's a tomato seed or ginger or turmeric or whatever, it's sprouted and you're not ready to go with lights, because that first emergence of that leaf or that cotyledon, whatever it is, it needs a light right away.
Right.
And it's going to get super leggy if you just go a day or 2 without light. So even if they're not on, just be ready, have your lights ready to go. That's all I got to say about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ken is the king of grow lights, so he knows about that.
Ken, tell me more about your grow light setup. I don't have any yet, and I'm actually looking in the market.
So at my house, we've had various iterations of it. So we've had like the stands you can buy. I got one of those from somebody in grad school. They were moving and didn't want to move it, so they just gave it to me. So that saved several $100s. Now we've got those big shelving units you can buy for like your garage and stuff. We have one of those sitting in our dining room that we've hooked up grow lights to with the little pulleys that we can raise and lower and stuff. We've got 3 banks of lights, so they're the T5 6 bulb.
Yep. I have those
So
just sitting in my basement waiting to be used.
ours are in our dining room. So we need to replace all the lights because we started our seeds and then we moved in. Every time you go to the hardware store, buy a cactus or two, and got a bunch of carnivorous plants under them. So lights are starting to burn out. So I need to replace all those before I start seeds here in a week or two.
It's just about that time, getting close, or it isn't, but we're all getting antsy to do something. So that's my problem. I usually do that too early.
Well, folks, that was a lot of great information about growing ginger, turmeric, and galangal. And we're leaving you at a cliffhanger this week because we're going to talk about, now that we've gone through the process of what is ginger, turmeric, and galangal, ordering it, pre-sprouting it, now we have to get it in the ground. And we're going to talk about that next week. Now, part of this research study that we did last year also includes feedback from you. So if you are a commercial grower, or if you just eat food in general, we have a survey that we would like you to take. So we're trying to determine, and also this will be fed back to the USDA and Illinois Department of Ag, the interest in growing these 3 spices. And so we do have a survey online. It is so short, it's ridiculous. You'd think, how are they actually getting information from us? But just go to go.illinois.edu/ginger. And you can take our short survey. So it doesn't matter if you want to grow it or if you just want to eat it or not, we need to know. So we just like that feedback so we can inform for, is this something worth studying for future research projects? So go.illinois.edu/ginger. Check us out there. Good Growing Podcast is a production of University of Illinois Extension and edited this week by Ken Johnson. Thanks, Ken, for taking a stab at this editing for this week. So I do appreciate it, and I'll send you lots of pictures.
Sounds good. And Nick, thanks for the questions this week.
Thanks for grilling us.
Yeah, not a problem. And looking forward to part 2 of the discussion.
So
let's do this again next. Hey, let's do this again next week.
Oh, we shall do this again next week. It's going to be part 2 of growing ginger. This time we're going to be getting it in the ground. And Nick's going to be asking us more questions about growing this crop to harvest. And then, you can order some and do this in your own backyard or in your farm as you see fit. So listeners, thank you for doing what you do best, and that is listening. If you're watching us on YouTube, watching. And as always, keep on growing.